And I have another one over here. We'll show you it again. We have our wall, and the boards come up one by one. Hey guys, welcome back to another Big Rook Games tutorial where we are going through and remaking Call of Duty Zombies in Unity 3D, and today we are finally going to implement our spawn walls into our scene, and this is what it will look like after we're done with today's tutorial. We have the spawn walls with the boards up. When the enemies come, they will remove the boards one by one, and in the next tutorial we'll add the animations for the attacks. But for now, they take down the boards, and when you hold E, we have a little sound come up and the animation for the board to be put back on. And I have another one over here. We'll show you it again. We have our wall. You hold down E just like in the Call of Duty game, and the boards come up one by one. And we have sounds. So let's jump back to where we left off last time, and I will show you how to implement these into the scene. Okay, so now we are back at our scene, and the first thing we want to do is import the spawn wall prefab. And to do that, you just go in your assets, you import package, custom package, you find the spawnwall.unity package, which will be in the description, and click open. And once it has loaded, you will just take the zombie wall and drag it into your scene. I dragged it in front of the window on one of the far side spawns, and you can see our spawn point box right here. You just want to line up the spawn wall with the wall. And so we have the spawn wall there, and the first thing we're going to do is add a collider to it so we know when the player is near it and when the enemies are near it. So I'm going to go into the inspector and go to add component, and I'm going to add a box collider. And for this, we want it to be the length of the window. So we are going to change the size, 10 for X, 3 for Y, and we want to center it lower so our bullets don't interfere with this box. So we want the Y to be -3. Looks good. And now we have our collider box. So let's go into our script for the spawn wall and make some changes there. So in the board script, double click that to open mono develop. And for this, I want a reference to the boards. So I'm going to put public game object, and this is going to be an array board. And then in the start function, because of the way this is set up, it starts with no boards up, and it'll be a cool little animation for when your game starts and all the boards board up right away. So I'm going to add a for statement for int I equals 0, I less than 6, that's the number of boards we have, I plus plus. And the for statement, all this is it creates an integer here, and it runs it while this statement is true, and each iteration it runs this command, which is I++. So now we can reference each of the boards in here, so we can say board anim I, which it runs through 0 through 5, dot play, so we can play each animation. And then we want to set the boards, which boards is the number of boards that we currently have on the wall. I want to set that to 6. Next we're going to add functions to add a board, remove a board. And so down here I'm going to add a function add board, and we also have remove board. Let's start with the remove board because that's what will be happening first when the enemies take it off. So here I want to only remove a board if there's a board to remove. So we are going to check the boards if boards is greater than 0. And in here I'm going to add code that calls a message inside of the script that is assigned to each board, and we will do that next. I'm going to call that disable board, and that will run the particle effect. So when a board gets taken off, the dust flies around, so it looks like something's happening. Then we're going to decrease the amount of boards that are on the wall, and we're going to check if the boards are equal to 0 after we take that board off. We are going to tell the spawn wall render to be disabled, and we'll discuss that a little later, but we do that to tell if there is any active boards on the spawn wall. And basically we will have the enemies looking to see if there's any active boards, or basically we will just have them look to see if the render is enabled. And if it is not enabled, they can walk through it. If it is enabled, they have to knock down the boards. So let's go to our script that is attached to the boards. So if you go to any of the boards and open the play animation script, we see here we have if play, it runs the particle effects. So under this, I'm going to make a new function, disable board. And here we are going to run the particle effects again. And also we are going to set this game object to not active, which is GameObject.setActive false. And if we go back to our board script, we can see we will call that when the remove boards is called and there's boards to be removed. So that board will be disabled and the particle effect will fire. So next we want to add code to our add board function, and this will happen when the player goes up and presses a key next to the spawn wall. And first, just like we did before, we want to check if we can add any more boards. So if boards is less than 6, and that's where we can put our code. And here we're going to enable the boards first. So board, and this is a little confusing, they're both named the same thing, but board is our array of boards, and boards is the number that we have. So if the number of boards we have is less than 6, then add a board. And to add a board, first we are going to set it active again. Remember we disabled it in the remove board. And then we are going to play the animation associated with that board, which is board anim. That is the array of animations that we have. And then we tell it which animation to play, and the name of the animations is board animation, and then the number associated with the board. So we are going to put board animation plus boards plus 1, which when we set this to string, we will add this string to this string. So the complete string here, let's say boards is equal to 0, and so we're adding 1 to it. The complete string that you will see there will be board animation 1. So that's effectively the same thing. So we're saying play board animation 1, and that's all this is doing here, the addition on the end. After that we will increase the boards just like we decreased down here, and that's all we need for this function. And now that we have add board and remove board, we do not need anything in the update function. We have this switch statement from before. We don't want to use that. It's probably an awful place to use a switch statement anyways. So let's take out all of this. We do not need it. So save that, and we have our play animation script with our modifications there. Save that. And next we are going to tell the enemy to take off the boards when it comes into contact with that. So open the enemy controller script that we have, and to find that in the scene you can go to the zombie or any enemy that you have. You can find it in the project folder too, and find enemy controller, just double click that and it will open in mono develop. And we want to tell it when to stop to attack the wall. So I'm going to create a couple functions here, and one thing I forgot to do back in our box collider for the spawn wall, go ahead and set is trigger, and this will make sure that nothing runs into it. Anything else with the collider or a rigid body that runs into it would be stopped if it wasn't a trigger. So set that to is trigger and go back into our script. And the first thing we're going to do is add a bool that checks to see that tells us when they are behind a wall. So bool behind the wall. Then I'm going to add a function that checks that sets that to true when we come in contact with the wall. So I'm going to add void on trigger stay, and this fires when you come in contact with a trigger, and it fires every frame that you are in contact with that trigger. So we have void on trigger stay, collider collide, and this holds the information with whatever it collides with. So first we want to check what we're colliding with, and here I have if collide.gameObject.tag equals spawn wall. So we want to, that is one thing we forgot to do on the spawn wall, we want to tag it in the inspector as spawn wall. And if you don't have spawn wall, you can go to add tag and add it to the last element. Back in our script, we want to check if it is a spawn wall. So if it is a spawn wall, we want to check if the render is enabled. If you remember, we disable the render when all of the boards are gone. So if the render is disabled, that means there are no boards up and the enemy should be able to just walk through. Here we have if collide.gameObject.render.enabled. So if it is enabled, which would mean that it has boards active, we want to set our bool to true. So we know that we are now behind a wall and we need to break through it. And next, I call nav.stop. If you were with us with the navigation tutorial that we set up the nav mesh and the nav mesh map, this will just stop the target seeking, the pathfinding for the enemy, so it won't move, it'll just stop and attack. And then we have the if attack statement, and this is the same one we use when it's attacking a player. There is a timer associated with it, so it only attacks every 1 second or so, and this will return true when that timer has exceeded the amount of time it needs to wait in between attacks. So inside of this if statement we have collide, which is data that is being passed through this function. .collider, we want to check the collider of the object, and we want to send a message to that object to say remove board. So when it collides with the spawn wall, we are sending a message to it saying remove board, so it will run the remove board function, which we already created back in our board script. We have remove board, so it will run this, it will take a board off, and that is all that is doing. Under that if statement we have else nav.resume, so if the render is disabled, which means the wall is down, we want to resume navigation, continue finding the player, and we want to say behind wall is false. So back in our update function, we increase the attack timer when there is a certain distance from the enemy, but now we want to also increase the attack timer so it can attack the wall. So we're going to say if distance is less than 3 from the player, or if behind wall. And then we can increment the attack timer so it can attack the wall. So next we are going to go into the player script and show us a cue when we go up to the spawn wall to tell us to press a button to repair the wall. So if you open the rigid controller, which is on the player object, so in this script we want to do a similar thing that we did with the enemies. We want to check if we are colliding with a spawn wall. So we are going to create a bool can repair wall, and we are going to create a float rebuild timer, and I'm going to set that to 0, and we are going to add similar statements just like we did to the enemy script. So I'm going to paste a couple functions here, void on trigger enter, and again we check what the game object is that we're colliding with, and if it is the spawn wall, we are going to set can repair wall equal to true. On trigger enter only executes once right when you enter it, opposed to what we were doing before was on trigger stay, which triggers every frame. And then on trigger exit we will use to do the same thing. We will check to see if it's spawn wall, and if it is, can repair wall is false when we exit that trigger. So in our on GUI we want to add a visual cue to the player when we can repair the wall. So I've already added this. We have if can repair wall, which we set down here, then show on the screen this prompt, which is press key E to repair. So now we would need to tell it how to react when we press the use key or the E key. So there is already on trigger stay about halfway down, and we are going to put inside this function some code that tells us to add a board when we use the use button and if we are near it. So here I'm going to run through this code real quick. If other, which is the collider, the information that's sending us from the object we're colliding with, if that tag is spawn wall, we want to increase the build timer, so this way all of the boards won't spring up all at one time because the frames fire so fast. We have if can repair wall, and inside of that we check for the use button. So input.get button use, this will check to see if the use button is pressed down and will fire every frame that it is pressed down. We also want the rebuild timer to be above 1 second. So every 1 second we will be able to add a new board just by holding down the key. And when we want this to fire, we want to add the board. So other.send message, this will send a message to the object we're colliding with, and we already made a function there called add board. So we send add board to the object, and we set our rebuild timer back to 0, so it has to accumulate a second before we can do it again. And if you save all 4 of those scripts that we just modified, which is the rigid controller, the enemy controller, the play animation, and the board script. And next we need to assign our boards to the script. So if you go into the board script on the spawn wall parent and open up board, you will have 6 elements. You want to put in the boards into those elements, so just drag and drop in order 1 to 6, and that should be the last thing we need to do to set up the spawn wall. We have our spawn walls up, we have the enemies, and again we don't have the animation for attack yet, but you can see that they are taking the boards down. So if we get rid of these enemies and we hold down the E key, you will see the boards reanimate onto the screen. You can hold down the E key and all 6 boards should come up. So next we just need to add a sound to the board. So go back into the scripts, and in the board script we are going to add 2 sounds: audio clip repair sound and audio clip bang sound. So I have a sound that is the sound of a hammer hitting a nail into wood, and then I have a single bang for when the board hits the wall. So we will use both of these sounds, and to do this we will do it right when we add the board. So right under where we increment the boards, I'm going to put audio.play one shot, which just plays the sound once, and it will play repair sound, which we just defined up here. It shows the volume here. So that'll play each time a board gets added to the wall. And for the second sound we want to wait about a second into the animation before playing the sound. So I am going to create a new function, void slam sound, and this is where we will play the bang sound here. And the reason I put it in its own function is because I need to use the function invoke, which invoke, you can run a function and then it takes a variable that you can tell it how long to wait until that function runs. So in the add boards, we are going to invoke, and you tell it what function to run, and it also takes a float time. So I'm going to put 1 second. So now when we add a board, it should play the hammer sound right away, and then after a second it'll play the slam sound. So since they are public audio clips, I need to assign them in the user interface. So if you go back to the spawn wall in Unity, you will see 2 new variables here. We have 2 clips, and I have 2 sounds that you can download. They will be in the description. So once you import those sounds, just drag and drop hammer sound to repair, and then gavel to the bang sound, and we have our sound set up. Now we just need to add an audio source to the spawn wall, and this allows us to play the sound at the spawn wall location. Disable play on awake, and what this does is if you go to the spawn wall in the scene, you can see now it has a speaker there. That means there's an audio source, and since it's associated with the spawn wall, if you walk away from it, the sound will dissipate with range. So if you have multiple people in here and somebody's standing over here, you're not gonna hear the spawn wall being hammered on because you're too far away. If we did all of that correctly, we should hear sounds when we put our spawn wall up. You can see it's taking them down, and when we hold E, you can hear the sounds of the hammer and then the bang at the end, which adds a nice touch. So that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial we will be adding the enemy attack animation and sounds for when the enemy attacks the boards. If this video helped you out, remember to like and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any future tutorials that we are putting out, as we release 1 or 2 of these tutorials a week, and we also give away a bunch of free assets on Friday now. So that's it for this tutorial, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.